Go ahead and talk about our expression for the day. So last week we had an expression using dogs. So if you remember, the expression last week was let sleeping dogs lie. But I know we have some cat people. So here's a cat expression for you. So I don't know if you've heard this expression before. So our expression today is let the cat out of the bag, or the cat is out of the bag. Now, you might say, well, why is the cat in the bag? Well, nobody really knows exactly where the expression came from. So there are many different theories and histories about it, but I couldn't find one simple answer. But anyway, the basic meaning of it means to let the secret out. So, you know, when you have a secret and you're trying to keep it and you're not trying to share it, but if someone shares the secret, then the secret is out. So in English, we say you let the cat out of the bag. So for example, I said here at the bottom, okay, now everyone knows how old I am. Thanks a lot. Looks like the cat is out of the bag. So, you know, maybe some of you want to keep your age a secret. You don't want to share your age. But if somebody shares it, oh, now the cat is out of the bag. Now everybody knows. So if you notice my cartoon here, this poor guy, he's having a birthday party. Unfortunately, it's a surprise birthday party for himself. So if you notice, it says, okay, try to act surprised. So I know right now in the coronavirus situation, I've had lots of friends who've had very lonely birthdays. Unfortunately, couldn't share their birthdays with other people. But still, the cat is out of the bag. It means basically the secret is out. So here is our question for the day, thinking about our expression, because again, we often have things that we want to keep secret. So here's a question for you. Are you good at keeping secrets? Or is it tough for you to keep a straight face? So, you know, sometimes people are terrible liars. They can't keep a secret. So, are you good at keeping secrets? And what about surprises? Do you like surprises? Do you like surprise birthdays? Do you like surprise gifts? Those kinds of things? Or do you always like to know what's going to happen in advance? So, once again, I'm going to open up the mics in the chat box if you want to share for just a moment. So, let's think about that first question. Are we good? Are we good at keeping secrets? Okay. Well, anyway, let's go back to our expression there. Uh, once again, our expression is to let the cat out of the bag, or the cat is out of the bag. So again, we often use this for the kinds of secrets you would share with friends. You know, don't tell anybody, maybe some particular secret about this or this. But you know, again, some people are good at keeping secrets, some people are terrible. So in this case, you could say, looks like the cat is out of the bag. Okay. All right. So that's our expression for the day. All right, now what I'd like to do here for the next few minutes is do a little review of some of the extreme reductions, just a quick little activity that we looked at last week. Now, at this point, everybody, you're going to need a pen, your pen, pencil, and some paper. So if you have those ready, because what we're going to do we're going to do two quick activities, okay? Now the first activity is called basically, what do I mean? So when I'm speaking, I'm going to say a short expression. This is kind of like the homework that you guys are working on. So you'll hear me say a sentence or a phrase, but I'm going to use an extreme reduction. What you guys are going to do is this just there on your piece of paper, just write down what you think I'm saying. Now, again, I will share the answers when we're finished, but I want you to try to listen to me first. Okay, so in just a moment, I'm going to kind of begin. So that's what I'm going to do here in just a moment. Okay, so okay, so I'm going to begin. So if everybody has their pencil and paper or pen and paper ready. Okay, so I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna turn off everyone's microphone just for a moment. Okay. All right. So again, so what am I saying? So I'm going to give you 6 sentences. I'm going to say them 2 times, and just there at your table or whatever, see if you can write down what I'm saying. Okay. So on your piece of paper. All right. Okay. So here is, if I can get this to work. All right. So here we go. Okay. So here's number 1. I gotta go. I gotta go. Number 2. Did you find it? Did you find it? Number 3, can't you understand me? Can't you understand me? Number 4, give him the answer. Give him the answer. Number 5, how'd you do that? How'd you do that? Okay, and the last one, number 6, why don't you tell her? Why don't you tell her? Okay, I'm going to read them one more time. So going back to number 1, I gotta go. Number 2, did you find it? Number 3, can't you understand me? Number 4, give him the answer. Number 5, how'd you do that? How'd you do that? That was number 5. And then number 6, why don't you tell her? Why don't you tell her? Number 1, I've got to go. I gotta go. I've got to go. Number 2, did you find it? Did you find it? Okay, now we'll review what I did here in just a moment. Okay, number 3, can't you understand me? So can't you understand me? Number 4, give him the answer. Number 5, how did you do that? How'd you do that? Then finally, number 6, why don't you tell her? Why don't you tell her? Okay. Now, again, I hope you were able to get some of them correct. Again, I know this is difficult, but what I'd like to do real quickly, just to analyze the answers, I'm going to go through. I'm going to use my tool here on the screen just to show you again what we did. So, for example, if you noticed, we basically cut the VE at the end of I've. So that happens a lot, especially when you're putting a lot of these extreme reductions together. And then if you notice, we linked got to, and we changed to that schwa sound. Ugh. So now it becomes gotta. I gotta go. So again, when you hear people say, I have got to go, I gotta. So that's one extreme reduction that we're looking at. Okay, and number 2, if you remember last week, and also in the video, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at the videos too for extreme reductions. If you remember in English, when we put the letters D and Y together, this is what we call an assimilation. So remember, assimilation is when we can put these similar sounds, these sounds together, and they kind of create a similar sound. So for example, when we put the D and the Y together, if you remember, it's going to sound like the J sound. Did ya? Did ya? Okay, so again, you can practice that there as you're listening. Did ya? Of course, we also reduced you, right, to ya, okay? And then finally, we did link, find, and it. Find it. Did you find it? Okay, so that's, again, lots of reductions and lots of things going on. Number three is another example of assimilation. So for example, when we put the T and the Y together, so you might remember last week when we put the T and the Y together, it often will sound like the ch sound. So in this case, when we put the can't ya, can't you, can't ya, can't ya, can't ya, can't ya, can't ya. See, when I say it faster, it's easier to put those two sounds. So again, you try it there. Can't you? Can't you understand me? Can't you? So again, that T and the Y also becomes an assimilated sound. Again, give him. So remember last week we learned, and actually we've been talking about this for a couple of weeks, this is called the disappearing H. So we can cut the H and then we can link the sounds. Give him, give him, give him the answer. Okay. We can also link here too. The answer, the answer. We can use a Y sound, the answer. Okay, number five. Number five is like number two. So notice we can connect the assimilation again. How'd ya? How'd ya? So notice we can reduce did. So into the apostrophe D. How'd, how'd, how did, how'd, ja. Again, we can reduce this to the schwa sound. Okay, and then finally, same thing here with the assimilation back in number three. Can't ya? Don't ya? Don't ya? So again, that's another example of that assimilated sound. Don't ya? And then finally, one more time, we can cut the H. Teller, teller. Okay. Now, again, if you were not here for the last couple of classes, this is what we talked about in this week's videos. So hopefully you'll have a chance to go back and look at the videos. But again, this is what we refer to as extreme reductions, where we assimilate or cut or change sounds. Okay? Now, I hope everybody did a good job. And again, I've recorded everything, so you can see it again here on the screen if you want to get a chance to review. Okay, so guys, I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. Okay, and now we're going to go on to the next activity. So now the next activity is a little different. So everybody, if you've got your paper and pencil ready, our next activity is a little different. Okay, so now in this particular activity, now you see some sentences on the screen. Okay, so over on the left side, I'm going to read them, but I'm going to read them clearly first. So number one, I'm going to go to the store. Number two, she doesn't have to tell you. Number three, tell him the truth. Number four, what are you doing? Number five, did you give her the keys? And number six, he ought to know the difference. Okay, now here's what you're going to do. So on your piece of paper, you're going to put 1 through 6. And what I want you to try to identify is what extreme reductions will you use in each example. Now, some sentences might have one extreme reduction. Some of them might have more. Now, let's do number one as kind of our example. Okay, so for example, number one, I'm going to go. Going to. Now, some of you might remember going to would be gonna, right? I'm gonna. So for example, number one, we would say, I'm gonna go to the store. So this is what I want you to do for the other sentences, for 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I'm going to leave this here on the screen. And what I want you to do in your paper is see if you can identify which extreme reductions are we going to use. Now, please remember, I'm focusing on the extreme reductions. So again, these crazy ones like gonna, for example. But for example, in number 2, the word you, we would normally reduce you maybe to ya, but that's not considered extreme. So in this case, each one would have an extreme reduction. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes, and then we're going to check our answers. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back here in just a couple to check our answers. Okay. Okay, time is up. All right, let's see how we did. So once again, for number one, going to is going to become gonna, right? So again, you can just practice with me, just repeat there at home. I'm gonna go to the store. Okay. All right. Number two, the main reduction is going to be have to, which is going to change to have to. So, for example, she doesn't have to tell you. She doesn't have to tell you. Have to. Okay. All right. Number three, hopefully you recognize number three, the H in him. So in this case, we're going to cut the H and we're going to link them together. So we'll say, tell him. Tell him the truth. Okay. Now, if you remember from last week, number four is the really crazy one. So if you remember, what are you? What are you? Well, in this case, what are you? What are you doing? Or what you doing? So that one's really crazy. Remember, as we said last week, the ch sound, what ch, comes from the T and the Y. So remember, in this case, when I say whatcha, it means I have cut the R completely. So it's completely gone. Okay, for number five, so we have two examples. Did ya, did ya, did ya, and then of course, excuse me, give her. Did you give her the keys? Okay, you try it. Did you give her the keys? All right, and finally for number six, again, some students may not be familiar with this expression, but the expression ought to, we basically, again, kind of, again, put them together, and we kind of cut or co-articulate the sounds to get the word oughta, oughta. He oughta know the difference. Okay, so one more time, starting at the top. Okay, so guys, repeat after me. I'm gonna go to the store. She doesn't have to tell you. Number three, tell them the truth. Number four, what are you doing? Or what you doing? Number five, did you give her the keys? And finally, number six, he ought to know the difference. All right. Now, if that was a little tricky, well, again, my advice is, again, watch the videos from this week. The extreme reductions video talks a lot about these kinds of extreme reductions. Now, students always say, Mr. John, do I have to use these? Okay, well, no, you don't have to use them, but I can tell you English speakers use them, American English speakers specifically. So again, you need to practice these so that you can understand them better when people are talking to you. Okay, guys, I've got two quick topics I want to discuss. And again, you're going to learn more about these topics in the videos for next week, for our next homework assignment. So I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. So our first topic is talking about focus words. Now, again, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the ideas of content words and structure words. So you might remember content words are those words in language that have meaning by themselves. Structure words are those words that, again, they're necessary, but they do not have meaning by themselves. So for example, words like and the and to, those would be examples of structure words. Sometimes they're called function words. Now remember, a sentence is basically a combination of content words and structure words, and we put them together to make sense, right, for a sentence. Now here's my example here on the screen. So it says, my name is John. Now, for example, if we had to identify the content words, which words here on the screen are the most important words? Which words give us meaning? Well, for example, name. Name has meaning. We know what the word name means. And then, of course, my name, John. So John, for example, these two would be content words. So in this case, when we speak, these particular words are going to sound louder and clearer to speak. The other two words, my and is, if you remember, these are structure words. So they're not going to be as important. So again, if you remember, we're going to reduce the sounds of those words. Okay? So again, name and John are the content words. My and is are the structure words. Okay? All right. So let's go on to the next one. Now, if you remember from a couple of weeks ago, we said that the content words are going to be stressed. Those are the words we're going to hear more clearly. So as your listening skills were getting better, these are the words that you could hear more loudly and clearly. But often the problem is the structure words. That's where students were getting having some difficulty because structure words are often reduced in sound, and that's because they're not so important. So if you remember last week, we talked about that schwa sound, that sound, to help reduce it. Now again, in my demonstration, I've highlighted here, so my and is now are going to be reduced in sound. So now everybody try this with me at home. My name is John. Now you can use your name. You don't have to say John, but you try it. My name is John, right? My name is Eduardo. My name is Mie. So in this case, you can try that. Okay, so again, name and John are the important words. So what we're learning this week is talking about intonation and how our voice goes up and down. Okay, so the changes in pitch. So pitch means how high or how low my voice is going to go when I use any particular thing that I'm speaking. Now we call that an utterance. An utterance is just when I'm speaking, something coming out of my mouth. Now I think many of you already know that we use specific intonation patterns. So for example, when we have a sentence, some of you might notice we kind of have a different way of finishing a sentence with our voice. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. Obviously, questions. You know, sometimes in questions our voices go up. Sometimes they go up and they go down. So for example, information questions or yes or no questions. And then finally, something that we're definitely talking about in our individual meetings. So some of you have met with me already for the pronunciation practice. We've been talking about hesitations and how our voices change when we use hesitations. Now again, you're going to see all of this again in the videos that you're going to watch this week. But for example, in using my name is John, well, the first thing I'm probably going to do is link, right? So name is, I'm not going to say name is, I'm going to say names. My name's John. My name's John, right? Now, if you notice when I'm speaking, the word John suddenly becomes the most important word. My name's John. John. Now, everybody, you try it with your name at home. Okay? Oops, sorry. So my name's Eduardo. My name's Mie, right? Okay, so in this case, John is the most important word. So if you notice, my voice rises and falls on that name. And that's because John is the focus word. The focus word is telling me what's the most important thing to listen to in that particular situation. Now, for example, my sentence here is very short. So John is that. But some of you have noticed in this week's pronunciation practice that some sentences have more than one focus word. And that's because we often use punctuation to separate sentences. So again, in the video, one of the videos you're going to watch this week is going to talk about focus and intonation. So I want you guys to watch that video because next week we're going to talk more about intonation, but we're also talking about it in our pronunciation practice. So once again, the focus word is where the pitch change will occur in the intonation pattern. So again, in a sentence or a statement like the one we have here, we use what's called a rising falling, or some people call it a falling intonation. My name's John. John. So notice my voice goes down. And the main change in pitch occurs on my name, John, because John is the focus word of the sentence. So guys, please remember, the focus word is telling the listener, hey, pay attention to this idea. Pay attention because this is where that change is happening. And remember, some sentences, very short sentences, may have only one focus word. Some sentences might have more, especially depending on punctuation. Now, that's going to be the next idea we're going to look at. And very quickly, these are called thought groups. Okay, so you're going to watch another video this week talking about thought groups. Now, before we do that, though, let me explain a little bit about how language kind of comes together. Okay, now some of you are already familiar, if you've taken some classes with me before, you're already familiar with the idea of collocation. But I want to talk about this idea first, and that is the idea called chunking. Now, chunking is a natural process. So this natural process is how we group words together. So when I'm speaking, you notice how I put words together because they have meaning together. But I want you to notice that a chunk, the idea of chunking is very flexible. Sometimes I might just group a couple of words together. Sometimes I group a lot of words together. Now, the question is, how do I do that? Well, that's depending on the language you speak. So again, in some languages, your chunks might be just groups of words or could be lots of words. Now, let's use a simple example, phone numbers. Phone numbers are an example of a chunk of information. You know, we don't just say a bunch of numbers, right? We use a specific pattern to give a number. For example, in the United States, phone numbers usually have 10 digits, right? So for example, we have the first three numbers for the area code. Not always, but we often have the first three numbers. So here in Kentucky, for example, the area code is 859, right? So 9 is the end of that first group. And then for the program, for example, 982 9375. So again, notice I'm grouping these numbers together in a specific way. Now, if you add the country code, so for example, the United States is 1, so I would say 1 859 982 da, 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 da. Okay, now think about your phone number here. Okay, you don't have to tell me your phone number, but think about how we group phone numbers together. And probably when you came from your country to the United States, you probably, you know, had a different way of saying your phone number compared to how we say it in the United States. Okay. Now, the question here is, how can we represent those chunks in a visual way? And of course, how we speak. That's what you're going to be learning about in this week's video. So in other words, when I give a phone number, how do I make it sound like it belongs together, not just a bunch of numbers, right? For example, when students are often coming from another country, like I'll use Spanish as an example. You know, in Spanish, people often give phone numbers like 52, 35, da, da, da. Well, if you notice, Americans don't do that at all. We use each number, right? 859. We don't say 859 or 98, 20 something something. So again, the idea is, how do we group? How do we chunk that information together? That's what you're going to be learning about again in this week's video. So if you think about English, so guys, think about in English, how do we reflect meaning when we speak or even when we write? Well, for example, we think about grammar, right? So how do words go together? Punctuation. So some of you this week in the pronunciation practice, you're noticing how punctuation helps to group information together. Of course, rhythm and intonation. So when I gave the phone number, you noticed I used a specific rhythm, 859, right? Then I took a pause, and then I gave 982. And I used intonation, the changes of my voice, to tell you when the next group was going to begin. So notice I didn't say 859. I said 859. So there's that focus, right? There's that change in my voice. So again, each language is going to use different things to help group information together. And I remember the first time I came into my first Spanish class, and my Spanish professor just kept talking and talking, and I thought, did the professor take a break? Did the professor stop somewhere? It just sounds like one big word. Blah, 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 blah. Well, that's because I was not familiar with how to chunk information in Spanish. So again, it's a very complicated process. So guys, what you're going to be learning this week, another thing you're going to learn is what we call thought groups. Now, thought groups are specific chunks of language, and these are the kinds of things that we use every day. So for example, a phone number is a thought group. It's a chunk of information that people recognize. If I gave a phone number to another English speaker, they would understand that's a phone number. Or think about the meeting IDs that we use for our Zoom calls. That's also a thought group, right? The group of numbers that you see for a Zoom meeting, that's also kind of like an ID, right? It's like a thought group. Now, to finish our discussion here this morning, the question is, are all chunks thought groups? Is everything that I put together considered a thought group? Well, the answer is no. Now, I'm going to demonstrate that here real quickly, but all thought groups are chunks. So again, all thought groups are grouped together in some way that they make sense. Okay, now let me demonstrate with just an example here on the screen. Okay, so for example, on the left side of my screen, I have the woman. And on the right side of my screen, I have Beyonce. Now, I don't know if you knew Beyonce's last name, but it's Beyonce Knowles. So that is her last name. All right, now the question I want you to think about is on the left side of the screen, the woman. So is the woman an example of a chunk? Is it a group of words that work together to make sense? Well, what do you think? Yes or no? Okay, well, in this case, yes, it's a group of words. It makes sense. I know that the is kind of pointing to the word woman. All right, now here's the next question though. Is this a thought group? Well, in this case, the answer is no. It's not a thought group. Now, I'll explain in just a moment. All right, let's try Beyonce. So, is Beyonce Knowles a chunk of information? Well, of course, the answer is yes. I think everyone recognizes it's a name. Now, the next question, though, is it a thought group? So, in this case, the answer is yes. It is a thought group. And so the question is why? Why is Beyonce Knowles a thought group, but the woman is not? Well, again, they're both chunks of information, but here's the difference. On the left side, we do have a grammatical relationship, but let's be honest, it doesn't tell me anything very specific. So yes, it gives me some meaning, but it's not a specific meaning. I don't necessarily recognize this as a specific idea. It's just the woman, which again is important, but it's not necessarily a thought group. All right, now what about Beyonce? Well, on the other hand, this is the thought group because proper names are often thought of as thought groups. Proper names go together. So again, your name. Now, I know many of you had trouble when you came to the United States at the beginning because, here in America, we use first name, last name. Sometimes we have a middle name. Now, some of you come from languages where maybe you have lots of names. And I'll never forget, I had a student many years ago from Brazil, and this student used like 5 or 6 different names. But every time I would meet this student, he kept changing what his first name was. And I said, "What is your first name? Tell me." And he said, "Well, it's actually this name. It's not this name." And I said, "Why didn't you tell me that before?" So again, I know in different languages, maybe names are different. But for example, here in the United States, that's a proper name, right? That's a thought group. Think about in your language, what would be a proper name in your language? So it might be different, but that would be an example of a thought group in your language. So guys, what you're going to be learning this week about thought groups are how we use linking patterns, intonation patterns, and appropriate recognition of pauses to show how ideas are connected together. So what you're going to be learning this week is you're going to learn that collocations are often considered thought groups, so like idioms and idiomatic expressions. You're already learning about punctuation. So in our pronunciation chats, we've been practicing punctuation and how we pronounce punctuation. Proper names, for example. Any sort of groups of numbers that we use, these are also considered thought groups, okay? Now, some of you have already had the chance to do the pronunciation practice with me, but just to demonstrate, if you have not done the pronunciation practice yet, this is the text that you're going to practice with me. But for example, in the very first sentence, I've been practicing a lot with the first sentence with a lot of you, the students. But for example, if you notice, here we've got a specific group of information. So for example, here we have one example of a thought group. This is referred to as a series, which usually a series is 3 or more things that we see on the screen. Now, we expect a series to have punctuation, so for example, commas, right? Or pauses to separate one idea from the next. There's the comma at the end of that series. And then we've been talking about in the groups, working with how we pronounce. So for example, I've been telling the students that when we say the last word of each part of the group, these are where we hesitate. So for example, shopping, sightseeing, every minute, minute, right? So the idea is these are the focus words of each part of this series. So for example, a series often uses 3 focus words because that's the important thing in the list. So again, in the pronunciation practice, some of you have already had a chance to meet with me and some of you are meeting with me tomorrow. This is an example. That would be an example of a thought group, a series, for example, okay? Okay, now guys, our time is just about up. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm gonna jump ahead for just a moment, but I'm gonna create a little video because what I want you to do for next week is to practice recording yourself. Now I don't have time to explain it. I was going to explain it here in our meeting, but instead I'll just make a quick video. So if you have an iPhone or an iPad, recording yourself is actually pretty easy. Now, if you have a Samsung, an Android, a computer, or so on, I'll have to kind of show you how to find where you can record yourself. But for example, on the iPhone and iPad, it's actually pretty easy, and there are a couple of different ways to do it, but you have to learn how to do it. So what I'm going to do here, unfortunately, since our time is up, I'll make a little video on this part here, and then I will share this with you, because what I want you to do, and I've already mentioned this in the meeting, so I'm going to kind of jump ahead, guys, because our time is just about up. So again, the idea is the video that I'm going to put together first is using an iPhone or iPad. But if you don't have an iPhone or iPad, I will create some other instructions to help you. So again, if you have an Android, a PC, or a Mac computer, I can show you how to do that. All right, our next assignment, really is going to be posted on Friday. So it's going to take me a couple of days to get everything together because I'm still meeting with students for tomorrow. My day tomorrow is very full. But what I'm going to do is post two videos, one on focus and intonation and another on thought groups. So I want you to watch those videos. You're going to record the video that I'm going to share here about how to record yourself. So I'll include that too in the homework assignment. And then the idea is you're going to record yourself. Now you're going to record basically saying the text that you're practicing with me in our pronunciation chat. So again, I will include a copy of that text that you can practice recording yourself with. Now, once again, I'm going to give you about a week to finish this. So you've got until next Friday. But I also know that if you need help, next week, I'm going to mention some times if you want to meet with me to help you. So again, using your phone, for example, if you're having difficulty using your phone or using your computer, I'll have some time available to help you with that. Okay?